Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you guys are doing good here tonight, Tuesday night, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time in the great state of Wisconsin. Typically, I would be starting off the regular podcast here, but as you guys know, I put the advertisements out. I am been privileged to be joined tonight by my guest, and I'll talk more about him in just a moment. But I want to thank you guys all for joining in here tonight. I want to make sure that I put this out here as well too. Typically, I like to go through comments in the comments section. Tonight, I will not be going through the comments, and there's a reason for that. When we have these conversations with candidates and everyone else that's running for any political office, what I'm trying to do is keep the conversation focused to about an hour's worth of time. Now, we have a lot to try to unpack within that hour of time, and in order to do that, I need to keep the conversation focused and flowing. So please make sure you take that under advisement. Also, if you do put comments on there, I'm going to ask you once again, please be civil about it. I will be looking at the comments later on, and I am not afraid to use the ban hammer. I will not hesitate to do that. And if you guys can do me a favor, please make sure to smash that like button, share, subscribe, all that other good stuff. So, as you guys know, I'm bringing on a new guest here, and this gentleman here is he's a Speaker of the House here, Speaker of the Wisconsin State Assembly, Representative Robin Vos, coming from the 63rd Assembly District. I want to welcome you on board here, Mr. Robin Vos. Mr. Speaker, how are you tonight, sir?
I am fantastic, Ed. Thanks very much for having me on. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. And, when I started this, what I call it started as conversations with, it is now the Wisconsin Conservative Conversations with, our candidates. A lot of what I'm trying to do here is to bring value to the people of Wisconsin. And I want to have the conversation with everybody because I feel that when we have these long form conversations, it adds to the political discourse. The idea of doing hit jobs, the idea of, just character assassination doesn't appeal to me. I would much rather have a civil conversation, even if we can agree to disagree, but at the very least, come to an understanding. And this is something I think you had about a month or so ago. We had a meeting of all the county chairs and vice chairs in Plover. And you had made mention of something to this effect with regards to the political discourse here within the state of Wisconsin. And I was hoping you might be able to expand on that just as, to kind of kick this off.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, and I do appreciate this. So a little bit of history just on where we've come and where we've gone. I was elected first in 2004, so I've been around for a while. When I first got elected, of course, Governor Doyle was in office. We had a Republican legislature. We then went on to lose one house. We lost both houses. Democrats had everything. Then I was there in 2010 when we had the entire legislature and governor all Republican. And of course, we've gone kind of backwards by having Governor Evers get elected in 2018. But the interesting thing was during my first 10 years in office, I do something that's a little strange. I call back every single constituent from my district. I don't call back everybody from Wisconsin, but I try very hard to reach out and have a personal conversation with anybody who sends me an email, a phone message, a fax, and I try to talk to people. And I would say for the first 10 years, the vast majority of people that I would call, whether they were Republican agreeing with me or a Democrat who thought I was wrong, we could have a civil conversation. And then something changed in like 2012, 2014, as we went through Act 10. Democrats got more angry. And when I would call them back, they would have a hard time having a civil conversation. Now, many of them still did. Many of them were very respectful, but a higher percentage over time have gotten more negative where, frankly, people will hang up on me or say, I don't want to talk to you, which is ironic. If you would contact your state legislator, you would think you'd want to actually have a conversation.
Right.
And frankly, since 2020, I've had that a little bit more on both sides, where people don't even want to have a discussion about the topic or perhaps learn from me what I know, because I enjoy getting to talk to people to learn what they know, or at least, what they believe. And that's the whole reason for having the most responsive government that we can. It's having the personal interaction, doing a show like yours, going on talk radio, listening to people. You can't do it 24 hours a day, but that's certainly the way that I think we improve the discourse. So Wisconsin Eye is something I've been a big supporter of.
Yes.
I used to have a show with Mark Pocan. Mark and I have become very good friends. We joke about the fact my dog's name was Reagan. His was Che after Che Guevara. He's gay, I'm not. I mean, we are about as opposite as you possibly can. But I think he's a good, decent person who's wrong on a whole lot of issues. And I think that's the way I wish we could have more conversations focused to say, look, I believe they're a good person. They probably love their wife and they, love their dog, but they're wrong on the issues as opposed to they're a bad human being or somehow they're evil or a rhino or whatever name you want to call
Right.
people. It doesn't really serve any purpose to call people names. It might make you feel better inside your pajamas in your basement, but it doesn't add to the civil discourse and actually change anybody's mind. In fact, what I've learned is the more you call people names, the more hardened they get in their wrong-headed approach. So I prefer to try to do it with a civil conversation. That's why I appreciate and wanted to come on your show.
Well, and I've tried to take into the rule where with regards to my social media, a lot of people are like, well, you're not going to respond to this. No, I'm not. And the reason I don't respond to a lot of stuff is what am I going to win out of this? I mean, I'm going to go on a back and forth with you and I'm not going to change your mind. You're not going to change mine. We're going to get to a point where we're just going to start insulting each other. And I grew up a military brat and I'm a Marine Corps veteran, so I'm kind of good at that. So it's like, are you sure you want to go down that path? Because I'm real good. But, I'm not going to get into a debate with people. I mean, unless if it makes me money, gives me an opportunity, makes me a better person, I'm not going into a back and forth with you. I
Right.
don't see the purpose of that.
I don't even mind having a debate if we're attempting to influence people who are undecided in the middle. You present a liberal perspective, I present a conservative one, or whatever you want to say. But the
Right.
difference is if it's two conservatives arguing who can be more conservative, or one person who's a diehard liberal just arguing with a diehard conservative, might
Yes.
make you a smarter person for knowing how to argue, but you're not persuading the other person. And I think that's what we have to focus on, persuading people, especially during election time. I don't want to
Mhm.
spend all of my time convincing people on the right that we are correct. I want to spend a whole lot of time convincing people in the middle who would rather watch, The Voice than a debate
Yes.
between two politicians, but they still vote. So we still have to do a better job explaining why our positions are better, why the conservative philosophy is better for their kids and our society. And I feel
Mhm.
like sometimes we're so focused on, very minute details between what two conservatives believe, we forget that the average person tunes out when you're into the minutia.
Well, when you talk about, getting to those people that are essentially not politically aware, because really during the primary seasons, these are your politically initiated people. These are the
Mm-hmm.
folks that are very active within the party, very active within patriot groups and other conservative movements. But, their issues that are most important to them may not necessarily be the issue for the average independent everyday voter, the person who politics exists to them from September until inauguration day,
Mm-hmm.
whenever that be, and other than that, it's just a blurb on the news cycle. So when we look at trying to, for especially on the conservative side, the Republican side, how do we reach out to people like in the independent area? Because I think a lot of the diehard politically initiated, their views are pretty much set in who they're going to
Mm-hmm.
back, who they're going to support. It's that large group in the middle.
Well, that's a great point. So, I'm a big believer in going door to door and talking to people about the issues that they are passionate about. If you gave me the choice between going to a Pints and Politics or going door to door in a neighborhood where, I don't know how people vote, I would probably choose the latter because I want to go out and be an evangelist, right? I mean, the whole
Right.
idea is not to speak to those who are already in the choir, it's to bring more people to sing. And I
Right.
think that's what sometimes we forget. So, I think that we have a wonderful story to tell because conservatives have been proven right in so many things from COVID to the election, how we deal with welfare, what grows the economy, what hurts a family, why school choice is right. I mean, I can go through a long list of things that
Right.
when you just take a few minutes and explain it to a person in the middle, many times they go, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And you convert a person to become, at least for one election, maybe a Republican.
Right.
But what they don't get into is arguing. What I found is, at least our polling shows, and I found in my own experience, that people in the middle don't want to listen to two people yell at each other. That's part of the reason that President Trump had trouble with some folks in the middle. He had great
Mhm.
policies. I still think our country would have been way better off, obviously, if he was in the White House. But he had a way that turned some people off with his
Right.
style. Now, I can't imagine. I would much rather have a rude conservative than a super friendly liberal, right?
Right.
But that's not where a lot of people in the middle were. So I think we need to, as a party and as a movement, show what we believe in, find the most electable people who are conservatives that we can, because it's about winning the election and then governing like a conservative. It's not
Right.
about standing on principle, losing the election, and saying, "Geez, I know I was right." That serves no purpose.
No.
So my hope is that that's part of what you're doing and others are to show what we stand for, to ask candidates what they believe, and then hopefully appeal to people who maybe haven't made up their mind yet, as opposed to those who already have.
Yeah. Well, one of the focuses that I want to have, using this platform is to give a humanizing aspect to the candidates, because I think oftentimes a lot of people see, your representatives, your senators, your governors as these, out of touch, out of reach people. And I think there's, so much more to it that you don't necessarily get in a 5-minute blurb on, television or on the
Mm-hmm.
radio interview or anything like that. And, it kind of leads me to this next point. You mentioned earlier about, being a speaker here recently, or, within the past, since 2013.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, you represent the 63rd, and you have a primary opponent. We've had him on the show, Mr. Adam Steen. So we've had him on as well. And you yourself, you are the incumbent. Now, coming on as an incumbent, you're also the Speaker of the Assembly.
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with both of those? Because as an assemblyman, you have responsibility to your district, of course, but as a speaker, does that go to the entire state, or how do you view that?
Well, I view my primary job, my 90% role, is to represent the people I live with in Racine County. That's what I focus my time on. As I mentioned before, Ed, I call back my own constituents. If somebody wants to talk to me from Wapaka, right,
Yeah.
I'm not going to probably take the time to call them back because I don't represent them in Wapaka.
Right.
I am elected by the 61 members of the Republican caucus and then ultimately the 99 in the Assembly. So, of course, I do my very best to communicate and lead and hopefully inspire the people who are in the legislature. But my real job is to represent the 60,000 people who live in Racine County. Now, I'm interested in what other people think, but if the entire state believes one thing, but my constituents believe another, I'm with my constituents. That's what I have to be.
Right.
I also know that at the end of the day, I am never going to agree with everybody 100% of the time. My wife and I always joke about it. Every once in a while, she's wrong. And she says every once in a while, I'm wrong, right? Because nobody agrees 100% of the time. And I think that's where you just have to do your best to explain. And what I try to tell people is I spend most of my time listening to people. That's why I still call people back. That's why I still go door to door. That's why in the latest polling that I've done in my district, I'm over 80% support. Because people, I think, want to know that at least, even if I don't agree, somebody is there doing what they think is right, as opposed to what they think is politically correct. So I try my best.
So you mentioned, if an individual says in a package, chances are you're probably not going to call them back. Is there a code, an unwritten rule that essentially you don't want to step on another representative's toes by jumping into their territory?
Yes, but I would say this: as an example, if somebody's having a constituent problem where they're having a problem with the VA or unemployment or whatever it would be, I would never work on the case for that person. I would refer them to their own state representative. Now, if for some reason the person doesn't get back to them or they're unresponsive, I would try to reach out to that person's office saying, hey, you got to get back to your constituent. If they wouldn't do it, have I helped people in the past? Definitely. So I'm not going to say that I absolutely wouldn't. But, on an average week, we get anywhere from 500 to 5,000 emails and telephone messages. Well, I take one day a week and I try to call back the people from my district. I usually do it on Thursdays, not always, but usually.
Right.
Well, I take 6 or 7 hours just to call back my own people. I can't call back people in every district. So I kind of made a rule that I'm going to call back my own people, and people should contact their own rep and expect the same. Now, I have no idea if your rep calls you back. I have no idea if most of the people do. Everybody's got their own representative, but that's how I've chosen to handle myself. So people say I represent the entire state. Well, I represent the legislature, and I'm elected by the 99 members in the body. But technically, I don't represent you, Ed, because that's not my job, right? I mean, I represent, I am elected on behalf of your state legislator, but it's not the same. So people, threaten me with that all the time, or, say you represent me, you have to call me back. No, you have a basic misunderstanding. I don't. I represent the people in Racine County.
In the 63rd, right. And that was something I think that when we had our discussion a couple of years ago, that was something that I think I brought up as well, because I think there's, and I mentioned this to several other people, that I think there's two general overarching philosophies of governance. There's the let me get everybody's opinion and I'm going to respond exactly to that, or I represent X, Y, and Z. You're voting for me for this here, so therefore I'm going to vote accordingly to this. And I think generally it's somewhere in between is where we look for the best type
Yeah.
of governance with representatives.
Well, and I listen. It's not like I ignore everybody's comments, but take Senator Johnson, right? I mean, if he gets a bunch of people from New York and California calling him, would you expect that it sways his view unless the people of Wisconsin agree with the people from New York and California? No, you'd say he should ignore them. He doesn't represent New York and California. Well, frankly, it's no different for me. I don't represent Wapaka County or Waukesha County.
Right.
So I think sometimes that's an example I can use the people that they get, because the idea is, yeah, Ron Johnson takes the email in. He sees that 100,000 people believe one thing, but if it's in contrast to what he believes or what his district or his state believes, I would expect him to stand with him.
Okay. Another question that, that kind of goes to your role here as speaker and also with the legislative process. If you can kind of explain a little bit, what exactly is your role as a speaker? Because I think a lot of people, even myself, up until recently, didn't quite understand what that is. And I think there's a difference between perception and reality. We can think that an individual's role is this, but the reality is it's something far different.
Yep. So the legislative process, as you know, of course, we have three branches of government. The legislative branch is divided in two: the Senate President, Chris Kappinga, and myself as the Speaker, each elected by the body, and we serve as the officers of the body. So when a bill passes, we both have to sign it to make it law before it goes to the governor. Okay, so that's just part of the constitutional process that we have. As the Speaker, I serve on a committee along with other members of the Assembly leadership and members of the Senate leadership, and we run the legislature. We have full-time employees. We have people who run our computers, attorneys who draft the bills. I mean, all those folks who are employees of the legislature. We oversee them. We oversee the budget. That is part of our role. But aside from that, our job is really mostly persuasive. I pick the committee chairs. That is my job as Speaker. But once I pick a committee chair, I then have the ability to refer a bill to their committee. But once it goes to their committee, they're more or less in charge of it. They decide to have a hearing. They decide to vote it out. They decide not to. I can persuade them. I can kind of cajole them. But in the end, they're an independent person just like I am. So my job at that point is to convince people that what goes on the calendar is a good idea. And we hope to have them vote yes. Never one time in my entire career have I forced somebody to how to vote. People say that all the time. It's absolutely untrue. You can't find a single example. I've never forced anybody to vote for anything. Do I work really hard to persuade them? Of course I do. But so do the other Republicans who believe with me.
Well, one of the things that I've heard and seen through the press, and unfortunately I do expose myself to mainstream media, unfortunately, but one of the things that I've seen and heard was that there's this idea that, well, if you don't vote a particular way, that might pull you off a committee, or that might, jeopardize the chairmanship. I was hoping you might be able to address that. I know there's a video circulating around right now from Representative Tim Rantham, where he talks about, hey, there's a $10,000, what essentially is the accusation of pay to play. And I know the Tim Rantham people are going to be upset with me, and that's fine. I have an ex-wife. You can't really hurt my feelings. But
it's all bogus. I mean, it's no different than how it works in Congress. As a member of the conference in the House of Representatives, you're expected to help raise money for the team to stay in charge. That's the whole point. It's no different in the legislature. We have people who have been committee chairs that haven't helped support RAC. We have people who have been supporters of RAC who haven't gotten committee chairmanship. So that's not really the way that it works. Tim Rantham, in many cases, and this is just another example, he's an exaggerator. That is mostly what he does, is exaggerate where things are. That'll cause him to go off the deep end, but I don't really care. Because I got to tell the truth. The legislature is a body that functions as a team. Now, many times we have people who are individuals, and we all are in some things where I'm passionate about one issue, you're passionate about another. But at the end of the day, we're all on the same team, pushing in the same direction in one half of the legislature to convince our colleagues to pass something to get it to the governor to become law. That's where I think sometimes people have a hard time with that. You have to actually convince other people. You can't bully them. You can't, cajole them. At the end of the day, you got to convince them with facts. And some people are very unpersuasive. Tim Rantham would be one. He is incredibly unpersuasive to his colleagues. That's why he's been unsuccessful in the legislature. Now, he wants to be a victim and play victim status because he's been ineffective. Well, okay, he can do that. But there's a reason that very few people have supported his legislation, because he's not effective. And he wouldn't be a good governor for that same reason.
Well, and that leads to another question, and I like to ask this of every candidate running for every office. It is the ability to build relationships. I think it's one thing to be, I think there is something to be said for an individual. It's like, you know what, you can't persuade me. My thoughts are my thoughts. I'm ironclad. This is what I am.
Yeah.
I think that is good to a certain extent, but I think that can also hamstring you as well, too. So, uh, I guess talk to us a bit about the importance of relationship building, especially when you're trying to pass bills, gain momentum, and try to get on colleagues that may even be, best example, Kerry Conceal,
Yeah.
Democrat and Republican sponsored.
So here's the way I would look at it, Ed. There are certain things when a person runs for office that are principle, deeply held things that you really believe. Okay. I am very proudly pro-life, right? I'm a member of the NRA. I consider myself a huge supporter and wish we would have more school choice. So I can get on a long list of things that somebody can give me a ton of facts on school choice, and I just don't think they're going to persuade me that it's not right for parents to choose for their kids. Okay. And there are a lot of things like that that are principled that I just don't think necessarily people are able to be persuaded. But, on legislation that deals with homelessness, right? I don't have some kind of a diehard philosophical belief about homelessness. If somebody comes to me with a good idea, I think that that's where debate and persuasion can happen because it's not a principle, it's just a good idea. Or if somebody comes and says, I want to change how we do school aid formula, or I want to change how we handle the budget on taxes, right? Or have a different way of financing state government. Those are all things that I'm open to listening to. Doesn't mean I'm going to agree, but there is a huge difference between a principle that you run on because it's a deeply held belief and an idea that you either support or reject after you know the facts. I think sometimes people, especially those who aren't elected, think it's all the same. Everything should be principle. Well, it's not. Because, frankly, it's just like masking. This is the example I often use. Some people criticize the legislature because when Governor Walker was in office, we didn't pass a law banning mandatory masks. Well, I don't know about you, Ed, but 3 years ago, I never even thought about the idea that the government would mandate masks, right? That's why you have a legislature, because something good or bad happens and the legislature addresses it. We're not static. So that's the whole point of bringing in new ideas, new things that happen in society, and we try to deal with them as best we can. I never thought when we passed legislation to ban or to mandate that a ballot has to be hand delivered to a clerk, put in a mailbox, or you vote on election day. I never thought we'd have people who say, I'm going to break the law by dropping it off with somebody else or creating ballot harvesting in the park.
Right.
We couldn't ban those because I didn't know that they were an issue. And I think that's where sometimes I feel like people are just unfair in thinking that we're supposed to be mind readers or psychics to know what's the issue going to be in 2 years that we should be dealing with today. We try to do that, but we're not always successful. And I think that's the challenge that people have with understanding that nobody knows everything that's going to happen.
Well, I think that that's a good segue into this next portion. I've got like all these notes over here, and I tried to break them down in an organized manner, but a couple of things that you said, they really all tied together. Everything from the WEC, COVID lockdowns, COVID itself, the election of 2020. I mean, all of it literally has blended together and has created. It was a perfect storm of just. There's a word I want to use, but I won't use it in here tonight. But it was bad. And I think to a certain point, and I've said this before, I understand that. During the first, from March of 20 on through the summer, I get it. People were scared. People didn't know what was going on. You didn't know if you were dealing with an extinction level event or was this something being overblown.
Yep.
And I hate to say extinction level event because it really sounds overhyped. But the way that it was being portrayed,
it came across 2 years ago, we didn't really know. I mean, now looking back, of course, we know the truth, but it's hindsight's 2020.
And one of the things when we look at the COVID lockdowns, and I mean, you could probably talk better to this. There was a lot of people, myself included. The question that came about was, okay, where were you guys? And I actually know the answer now, but I think there was a lot of people that were. They were going to rallies and they were trying to, get the governor to listen, get these, mandates lifted, these lockdowns, all this ridiculous stuff, which hurt the economy here in Wisconsin. I mean, devastated it.
Mm-hmm.
And the question comes up, it's like, okay, so where are representatives? I mean, because this was the time that we needed you the most. And it, well, the best way of putting it is between COVID and the summer of riots or the summer of love, depending on how you want to frame it. And perhaps you can speak more to it.
Well, I mean, it's hard because I feel sometimes like we have to reiterate what should be commonly remembered, but I feel like people have
Yep.
such a short attention span in the world that we live in nowadays, they kind of forget
Mhm.
what happened. Remember, Governor Evers locked down the state on St. Patrick's Day. Under the law, he had 60 days to be
Yes.
able to go through and decide what was next. At the end of 60 days, he decided to re-up the the mandatory lockdowns. We went ahead right away to court because we knew that if he believed he had the power, as soon as the legislature went in and immediately overrode the 60 days, he would go right back and issue another one. We'd have to go back in the next day, and it would become this leapfrog effect that would never be effective because the law, when it was written, never comprehended the idea that a governor, even though the law says you can't do it a second time, would do it anyways. So we knew the only way to fix it was to go to court. We went to court, and if you remember, shortly thereafter, we won, and the state reopened. So the only reason that Wisconsin did not end up turning out like Michigan, Minnesota, Illinois, California, was because the legislature went to court and won. So I feel like there's revisionist history when people think we didn't do anything. Now,
Right.
did he try to impose another lockdown? Yes, he did. Just like we said we would. The court said he can't. Well, then it went down to local municipalities having the ability to do some of these things. And frankly, I do believe that local municipalities have the right to make their own decisions by and large. And that's where citizens have to elect a better county board, a better city council.
Right.
The legislature can't prevent everything from happening. I mean, even today, I'm sure you already know this, Ed, but kids in the Madison School District are still
Yes.
wearing masks. It is crazy. Here we are 2 years later, and the liberals in Madison can't let it go. So there are some communities where, unfortunately, they're going to elect people who disagree with what you and I believe,
Right.
and people are going to have to pay the consequences. The legislature is not all all powerful to be able to override every single local government every time. So I feel like a lot of what happened now is people looking back saying we should have done it differently. Well,
Right.
we won. We had the least restrictions of almost any state in the country because of the victories that we had. And now people are somehow going back with revisionist history saying we didn't do enough. That's just bogus and not true.
And I think that was something, and depending on where you were in the state, um, I think people's opinions of it can be different. Because if you were in the Milwaukee area, that whole summer, you were still essentially on lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
You had to wear a mask indoor, outdoor. Your pets had to wear a mask. Maybe your fish did too. Wasn't sure about that. But where I'm at, and I live in the Westchester County area. As soon as we were given the green light to go, and I believe that was just a few days before Memorial Day,
Mm-hmm.
we were green. And the only time you had to really wear a mask is when a business said, "Hey, we want you to wear a mask." And you know what? You weren't getting in trouble for wearing a mask or not wearing a mask. You were getting in trouble for trespassing at that point.
Right.
But
And again, now I believe in private property rights. So even though I think it was over the top for people to require a mask to shop at a store, you have the right to shop there or not. And that's the power of the free market where we have those choices as individuals. I also
Right.
look and feel like there were certain things where, of course, I voted for legislation, I sponsored it, we got it to Governor Evers. We should have never allowed any government to close a church. We should have never required mandatory vaccines in any way, shape, or form. We should never say that you have to have a vaccine to work at a place of, at your place of employment. All those things should have become law. But we had a governor who had a different opinion, and we couldn't override a veto because we don't have enough Republicans in office.
Right.
So again, people get frustrated that I guess I wasn't able to convince Democrats to go against their own governor. Well, I feel like I'm pretty persuasive sometimes, but that's a prime example where they had a deeply held belief they weren't going to do it, and we weren't going to convince them. So the only way to change it is to get a new governor and a legislature that adopts the same rules. So going forward, it'll never happen again.
Now, are there plans to do exactly that? To ban the practice of forced mandatory vaccinations for work purposes? We know, I mean, schools have their vaccinations, and to a certain point, and we can get into the whole discussion of vaccinations because there's a lot of people that go extreme on both sides. But for the most part, I don't think anyone's arguing against an MMR shot. I think what they are arguing against is a drug that's still under emergency use authorization. where the one that's actually been approved by the FDA is not on the market right now. So the question
Right.
there
I
is,
mean, so
you know,
those are bills I've already voted for. Now, some of those
mhm,
didn't make it all the way through the state Senate. So, I don't want to, say that they're going to definitely become law. I mean, if I voted for them already, I will vote for them again. There's no reason not to. So I feel like any bill that got through the legislature to Governor Evers' desk that he vetoed, I see no reason at all why those bills will not come back into play as soon as we get a Republican governor and in the spring of 2023 become the law of
right,
Wisconsin. I mean, there's no reason not to. Now, we always, Governor Walker used to always joke about how a bill becomes a law. The legislature passes it, the governor signs it, a liberal sues in Dane County, and hopefully the Supreme Court makes the right decision. So we've got
yep,
that challenge to go through because we've got a really important Supreme Court race in 2023 for control of the court, which could, even if we get Republicans in charge of the executive branch and the legislature, we got to make sure that conservatives also have justices on the court who don't think that they should be writing the law in spite of what the
right.
legislature or the governor has decided. So all these things have to happen in tandem. But I'm very optimistic. I think we've got good people running for office. We're in the process of recruiting good people to run for open seats in the legislature and take on
Mhm.
Democrats. So I think we're in a good spot. We just have to realize that sometimes it takes longer than we want because government, as the founders intended, was never meant to be fast. It was meant to be thorough. And that's what we try to be.
Well, and that was another question I wanted to ask because I think there's a lot of people, and I don't know if this is a byproduct of being in the social media era where we just kind of want to snap our fingers and boom, it's done. The legislative process by the founders has always been to be slow, deliberative, and even
Mm-hmm.
slower within the upper chamber, regardless of what they
Mm-hmm.
call it, whether be it a Senate or, upper house, however you want to frame it. But it was always meant to be slow, deliberative, so that way things didn't just get rammed through like, oh, I don't know, Obamacare, Patriot Act,
Read the bill.
things
Yeah,
like
right.
that. Yeah, you gotta pass the bill in order to know what's in it.
Right.
Um, to that end, I guess, is there a way that, and I don't know how do we get people to better understand that? Because again, I think everybody, we see the problems going on, and boy, we want a quick fix. We want to get back to, you know, 2019, when life
Right.
was normal.
More normal, yeah. Well, so that's the hard thing because, our process, you have to convince a legislator to draft a bill. They circulate it to ask their colleagues to put their name on it and support the idea. It goes to committee, has to have a vote on the floor. I mean, each chamber is a couple weeks in the process. So both chambers, usually a month is the fastest things could ever happen.
Right.
Well, for a lot of people, they don't want to wait that long, just like you had indicated, Ed, and that's the problem. Usually, the things that we rush through are the ones that are either easy because they're more ideological, or we believe something, so it's just a principle, or they're
Mm,
super complicated, and sometimes we make a mistake. So the
right.
things that are super complicated, you don't want government to rush. That's how we have problems, and that's how things aren't thorough. So I feel like it's a balancing act to try to get things done as quickly as we can, but making sure that once it becomes law, we don't want to look back and say, "Why did you do that? That was a major mistake." And then you got to fix it.
Right. And I think oftentimes when you try to fix it, oftentimes that might either make things worse or there's more rhetoric and fire and brimstone that goes back and forth from, both sides of the aisle and
Yep.
nothing really gets done. Speaking about fire and brimstone, you're going to love this next one. Um, 2020. Obviously, we
Yeah.
talked a little bit about the summer of love and, COVID, but we also had a very important election, an election
Hmm.
where and I'll be the first to say it. When Trump was running, when he came down the golden elevator and he came on down, I'm like, oh, this is going to be good. I need some popcorn. I need lots of it too. And, I'm all for, kind of watching a train wreck. And the more I watched it, it was just kind of like, yeah, it's not my guy, And it's funny because I know a lot of Trump people get mad because I said that. But he wasn't. Ted Cruz was the guy that I thought was going to be the best pick. Um, yeah, ultimately Trump won the primary. He got elected, and he turned out to be a phenomenal surprise. He
Yep.
governed. He's more populist than anything else, but he certainly governed as a conservative. And obviously, with the loss here of 2020, there was a lot of speculation as to what had happened. Everything from certain voting machines to, different shenanigans. You mentioned, voting in the park, ballot harvesting. Um, and there's a lot to unpack with this because even right now, there's a group of people that are very adamant to decertify the election. Now the question is this and just on the basic, is this something that can even be done? I know it's an open-ended question and it's a tough one to be concise about, but I guess what are some of your thoughts on just the whole ball of wax there?
So let me start by saying I take my oath that we raise our right hand at the beginning of every session and you swear fidelity to the U.S. Constitution and the state constitution. Now, probably for some people that's just just a perfunctory act. They just do it because it's part of what's required to get into office. But I take it really seriously.
Right.
Before every single time that I am sworn in, I reread the Wisconsin Constitution. It's not a long document; it only usually takes about an hour. But I reread it to remind myself of the duties that we have as a state government and what is allowed and what is not. And I feel like people have this belief that they throw around Constitution and constitutional republic when it serves their purposes. I actually fundamentally believe in it. And I am 100% certain that I am not a lawyer. That
Right.
is the only thing I am 100% certain of. Okay. So
Yeah, we should put that disclaimer out here.
Yeah.
We're not lawyers. We don't play them
Right.
on TV, but yes.
I'm not, I have no Facebook legal degree. I mean, I have no idea. Okay. So I start by saying there are certain things that I do know. I know how to be speaker because I've done that job. Okay. I feel like I am somewhat of an expert on that job because I've been in it for a while. So there are people who I also consider experts that are lawyers. They study the Constitution. They go to court. They argue. And there are 3 people that I have talked to about this who I fundamentally believe know way more than I ever would hope to about the law and the Constitution. Certainly. That is Jim Trupus. Jim Trupus argued on behalf of President Trump in all the lawsuits in Wisconsin. He was President Trump's attorney on the recounts. He was a Scott Walker appointee to a judge in Dane County, and he was defeated because he was a conservative. Okay, he is a smart dude. Second person I listened to is Rick Essenberg, who is at the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, the best nonprofit conservative law firm in the entire country. We are lucky to have them here in Wisconsin, and they have been fighting for our personal rights and civil liberties and restrictions on the government ever since they were founded. And then the last person is Jim Bopp, who is a national scholar. He has represented everybody from Citizens United to the National Right to Life Committee and everybody in between. Those 3 individuals have all been very clear in saying it is absolutely impossible to decertify the election. It is a made-up thing that can never occur. It's never occurred in the history of the country. So the idea that people are going to somehow say that because a different person that they listen to believes that you can do it, they have every right to believe that. And I've never said you shouldn't listen or have your own beliefs. But I am not going to take the oath that I swore and go along with somebody from another state who has this different idea to get somehow the ability for us to recall electors, which was not possible after January 6th, and break my oath to the Constitution. I'm just not going to do it. And there's a reason that of the 132 legislators, only 1 person has put their name on the document, Tim Ramthun. No state senator has stepped forward and said, you know what? I agree with you, Tim. I'll put my name in that document. Or anybody else on the assembly on the Republican or the Democrat side, not one other person. Well, usually if one person believes something, they have every right to believe it. I'm not going to say they don't. But they don't have the right to say that those of us who disagree are somehow disloyal or dumb or don't know the Constitution or rhinos or whatever you want to call it. That's just frustration speaking because you are unable to convince people of something that you believe in. And I give Tim the credit. I think he probably does believe in it. But it doesn't mean that just because he believes in it, all of us have to as well. And the way our process works, if you only have 1 member who believes in something, the bill doesn't go through a committee. The bill doesn't get to the floor. That's not the way it works. You have to actually convince other people along the way. So that's the biggest challenge that I have had with, people kind of getting all fired up about this topic. I want people to be all fired up about making sure that we actually have a Republican governor who will sign the bills to fix the issues we saw. I want us to actually have a Republican attorney general who isn't going to sue us in court so we don't have the ability to issue subpoenas to find out what happened in 2020. Those are the biggest issues that I care about if you want to make sure it doesn't happen again in 2024, not decertification and a bunch of things that are far afield from the ability to actually do something about 2020.
Well, and something as it relates to the word decertification that I've often thought about, and I make the analogy that when Congress certified the election on January 6th, it's pretty much, no refunds, no exchanges. And I
Right.
think just because, you say that, we're going to pull back our electors, I can just kind of see them like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. Well, I said, it doesn't matter. You ain't getting
Right.
your money back.
Right.
Not happening. And I do wonder though, because I can see this going down a very dark path if this is an issue that got pushed by a number of different states. And I don't know. Um, Oftentimes people have talked about that we're in a cold civil war. Some people say that maybe it's gotten even hot to this point, because we are a very fragmented nation. Very polarized left and right. And that's, to our earlier point in our discussion, the civil discourse just amongst the left and the right is almost non-existent. The values are almost not shared, and it's really hard when you start seeing that type of tribalism within people within our own party, within our own
Mhm.
conservative movement. And I don't want to disparage anybody, and then people will be like, well, you're doing it. Okay, fine. But I don't want to say they're any less of a conservative. I just don't necessarily agree with that.
Right, and that's okay because we live in a world where it's okay to disagree.
Right.
It doesn't mean you're a bad person. And one of the things that I also think sometimes people don't think ahead, and this is part of our job to be a little more strategic. Let's just assume that the legislature did have the power, which we don't in Wisconsin. I don't know about any other state, but we absolutely do not have the power in Wisconsin to decertify the
Right.
election, even if we wanted to. But let's say that we did, and somehow it stopped the process, and we took Joe Biden out of office. And then we have an election in 2024, and New Mexico, which is an all blue state, votes for Donald Trump. In Arizona, or I'm sorry, Nevada, all blue state right now, votes for Donald Trump.
Right.
And those are the two states that give him the election because they've now swung.
Mhm.
What if their legislatures say, we're not going to seat Donald Trump because we now have this new precedent? Well, how do you
Right.
get around that? I mean, so the very idea that we're going to allow a state legislature to input its will for that of the voters, that's not what the framers intended. That's not possible. But we need to have laws on the books that are followed. That's where I wish we could get on the topic to say, I worry that we need to have accountability in the Wisconsin Elections Commission. I worry that we need to make sure that clerks, who are ultimately the ones under the law responsible for running elections, know that
Right.
it's their job to run the election, not WEX. I mean, there's a long list of things that we need to clarify and correct, but we never even get to talk about those. And there's a long list. So I had our office put together a document of every single thing that we have done on elections. And let's see, every single thing that we have done on elections. It is a ton. You can get it from your
Right.
own state legislator. So I just wish people would look and say, let's focus on the future, which is how do we make sure that in 2022 and 2024 we have a fair chance to win? And
Right.
that's what we need to be getting people rallied around, not how do we overturn an election, which is unconstitutional.
Well, and I think the rebuttal to that, that I've heard, was that if we can't trust the past election, how can we trust the one that we have going forward into 2022? And the only real answer I can give is that, what's your choice? I mean, like, you really don't have another choice. I mean, we got to win in overwhelming numbers. I get what you're saying, because I believe, I'm going to use the F word here. I believe there was a lot of fraud. I
Mm-hmm.
know I said the F word.
Yep.
But the question is to what degree of fraud was there? Was there enough to exceed 21,000 votes, the margin that Biden won the state in? And I've heard people
We
say,
don't
well,
know.
right.
We
Well,
don't know.
I've heard people say, well, we do know. We have this evidence. It's like, no, no, no. What you know, what you think you know, is different from what you can prove.
Right.
So how does that? How do we work with that? How do you respond
Well,
to somebody like that?
yep. From my perspective, we have to remember what happened with the election. Okay, now, like many of us, I spent a lot of time going door to door in 2020. An awful
Mhm.
lot of the people that are on Facebook or come to these events didn't do a single door. They ended up
Right.
talking to most of their friends and families who agreed with them. Now, that is a pleasant way to go through an election, but
Mhm.
that's not what a candidate does. Because a candidate has to go out and convince people who are either doubters or maybe even on the other side to switch and come our way.
Right.
So I went door to door, and I distinctly remember lots of people, unfortunately, telling me, "Look, I've been a Republican my whole life. I'm going to vote for you, but I just am going to leave the top of the ticket blank." And I would
Mhm.
try to explain to them, "Geez, I think President Trump's done a great job on the judiciary. right? Making sure we had the tax cuts, were representing us around the world, go through a long litany. And I didn't convince enough of them, because if you look at the numbers, and this is a fact, 50,000 people voted for one of the 8 Republicans running for Congress, but didn't vote for the top of the ticket. 50,000 people, about a little bit more than that, voted for a member of the Assembly Republican caucus, but didn't vote for Donald Trump. So there are people all across the state who said, I'm just not going to fill out the top box. Now, I think that was a dumb move on their part, right? Because we now have Biden inflation and the world is embarrassing. There's so many reasons why I think they made the wrong choice.
Right.
I want to have a chance to convince them again. And this idea that we're going to go back and say that it was all fraud. Now, were the Zuckerbucks wrong? Yes. I think that was the clearest indication of election tampering in my mind. You can't have a contract run by private contractors and have an election where they got access to data that the Republicans didn't call it fair. It's just not possible. Was it right that we had people who were in nursing homes voting where they didn't have the mental capacity?
Yes.
No. I mean, you and I can agree on a long list of things that need to be fixed. But even in the nursing home example, I have no idea in Racine County, in my own district, how the 100 people who voted in those elections cast. Did they all vote for Joe Biden, or did they all vote for Donald Trump? I have no idea, and we never will. So the assumption is that somehow all those votes were cast for Joe Biden. We don't know that.
Right.
We never will. So this idea that somehow, all the ballots that people think were cast incorrectly were going to be Joe Biden votes, we do not know that, which is why it's so hard to have proof to actually say we're going to overturn the election, because you can't do it on suspicion. You have to do it on proof.
Now, when you say that we'll never know, and this is a genuine question on my end, how is it that we can't find that out?
Well, because in our democracy, you don't have a way to actually know this was Ed Delgado's ballot.
Okay.
You know what I mean? You have a number, you put that down, and then you cast it in the machine. But the whole idea is it's a secret ballot. We don't have the ability to do an open records request, get all the ballots out, and find out how everybody voted to identify you as a Republican or a Democrat.
Right.
So what would happen is, and this is how it occurs right now, and people need to know this. This is how the process works. In every single ward in the state of Wisconsin, at the end of the night, they count the number of ballots by hand that went in the machine. That matches the number on the book. If for some reason the number is off, they randomly draw a ballot. Have no idea if it's a Trump ballot or a Biden ballot. They just draw one out. So the numbers match.
Really?
So the idea that the machine is somehow manufacturing ballots is absolutely impossible. It cannot happen. And I just feel like on a lot of these things, we've gotten to the point where people say things over and over without knowing how the process really works, because they read a news article or saw some video. Well, we got to focus on what the facts are. The facts are that by and large, I think our clerks do a good job. The problem in my mind is before the ballot ever goes in the machine. It's, did we have people who weren't eligible to vote? How do we know that people were citizens? How did we make sure that their ballots weren't harvested? How did we ensure that they were actually turned in according to the law, so that somebody was a resident for 28 days? I mean, all the things that have to happen, that's what I want to focus on fixing. So people have the integrity in the system to know it. But I'm not going to focus on thinking that somehow a machine, which I know can't do it, change the ballots. It's impossible.
Right. How do you, when you look at, certain things, like this has been an issue for as long as I can remember, just the idea of cleaning up the voter rolls. I think that's been something that people have long said, hey, we got the dead voting. And it's a meme. It's actually kind of an entertaining one too. But no, my grandma became a Democrat. But yeah, it's a pretty funny meme. But there's often times where you see evidence of that, and evidence is just, it's data. It's things that you see out there, but it's not, once you put it together, that's where you get your information. There's just not enough.
That's one of the bills that we actually passed. So what would happen is every single day, you would have the database from the State Elections Commission pinging against the DOT to say, did Ed move? So he has a new registration. It would ping against the DHS to know death certificates. So instantly when somebody died, they'd be taken out and you'd notify the clerk to say, okay, Robin's mother passed away, take her out of the system. So we already have that legislation ready to go. It's another one of those where as soon as we get a GOP governor, I am pretty confident that she will sign it. And I think that's the most important thing for us to look at is how do we fix the system, knowing that we now understand the flaws as opposed to somehow thinking that we can go back and fix what occurred. We can't. We can only fix it
Right.
going forward.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard thing, because I think when we look at what happened in 2020, it's like, man, they're going to get away with this. Like, this is nonsense. And in a lot of ways, I can certainly empathize with
Yep,
that. I
I
can
can too.
even agree with it to a large degree. But days move forward; they don't move backwards, and that's, really what where I try to do my part is to try to have these conversations with people to move forward. Because
Well,
if
and
we're
that's
going to
the
just
whole
sit
point.
here,
I
Mhm.
mean, we are the only legislature in the entire country that hired a taxpayer expense, very well respected investigator to look at what happened, and that's Justice Gableman.
Yes,
And they have thrown up every possible roadblock they can. But the reason that we hired Justice Gableman was to ask the questions and find out what occurred so we could pass legislation to fix it. It wasn't to go back and do something about the 2020 election. It was to look
Mhm.
forward to be able to say, how can we write the law more specifically? How can we make sure this kind of shenanigan doesn't happen again? And that's why I feel like a lot of people somehow believe that we can go back.
Mhm.
As you said, look in the rearview mirror. We just can't do it.
Well, people like to often cite the interim Gableman report when they talk about the word "could" in the idea of decertifying. And I understand it's still an ongoing investigation. So I guess, you know, words mean things, especially in the legal sense.
Mm-hmm.
Could, very different from can,
Yeah.
or, it has the ability to. How do we deal with that going forward? Looking
So
at this interim report.
yeah. So the way we're looking at it is, we are kind of at a roadblock where Josh Call has filed lawsuits on behalf of the Wisconsin Elections Commission. We are in front of Dane County courts, which are certainly not friendly. They're super
Right.
liberal. So we have to work on winning the lawsuits, which give us the ability to decide if we're going to issue subpoenas. I mean, part of the challenge that we have is under the law, if I issue a subpoena for you to testify and Ed shows up to testify, you are now immune from prosecution with anything that you tell me.
Hmm.
Well, I'm a little nervous about that because if for some reason we now learn that we have the ability to issue these subpoenas and we now know it in October prior to the election, well, I certainly would like to empower the Republican AG to decide if he wants to prosecute a
Right.
person that now has the potential to have to answer under oath what occurred in 2020. So I want to have the right to do that, but I don't know if we're going to exercise it until we actually discuss it with people, again, smarter than me, lawyers, and people who are going to
Right.
be involved in the prosecution. So I feel like that's how we have to work on winning these lawsuits. That's the most important thing for us to retain the prerogative. The
Mhm.
investigative phase, in many ways, is kind of wound itself down. I mean, I think Justice Gableman has done a really good job. We now know that there have been testimony in front of the committee. We have done our part as a legislature, which is to shine a light on the facts that we know. But that's all we do. We can't prosecute. We don't have the right to override the election. None of those things can occur.
Right.
So we're focusing on what do we know and how do we fix it.
Well, looking forward, and that's how I like to look at things because, like I said, we move forward in time, we don't move back. One of the things that is, to me, I think was a big deal, especially in 2020, was this idea of rack.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and I've heard Ron Johnson speak on this a number of times. There was what 100 plus, almost 150 Democrat races that were run unopposed in years past,
Mm-hmm.
no Republican opposition. And then all of a sudden, this group comes together and say, hey, we're going to run Republicans in every single race. I mean, bar none. I understand it's 90% Democrat, but you know what? We got to make inroads somewhere.
Yep, we still need
Uh,
somebody to fly the flag. That's right.
I was wondering if you can kind of speak on that here as part of our last topic here for tonight. And like I said, there's so much we can get into, so much to really dive into, but we want to try to keep this to about an hour. And
Sure.
I did not want to overlook um, the rack, just the importance of that.
It's interesting that people somehow have tried to make our political operation, which elects conservatives, into some kind of a boogeyman. It is
Hmm.
it is beyond stupid. So RAC is the Republican Assembly Campaign Committee. It is an organization that's been around for 50 years. It focuses on electing conservatives to the legislature. And we were very lucky that we had a generous donor this year who said, I want to make sure that there's a Republican running in every race, because somebody knocking on doors in the inner city of Appleton or knocking on doors in Beloit or La Crosse or Eau Claire, where they have not had somebody doing it before, they're going to
Right.
convert people because going door to door makes a difference. I told you that's kind of our secret sauce. So we know that was one of the reasons that President Trump did better in 2020. He did not win, but the trickle up effect, which Ron Johnson talks a lot about, is based on what RAC, the Republican Assembly Campaign Committee, started, which was to say, let's run somebody in every race. Let's make sure that we have the resources to do so. And once again, we had a generous donor who did that. So I would think that'd be something that people, again, would look and say, thank you. We want to have a candidate in every race because it's important for people all across the state to have a chance to vote for Republican. Even if, like in Racine, our candidate got 30%. But you know what would have happened when Greta Neubauer ran for re-election if we didn't have a Republican running there? She would have gotten 100%.
She got 100%, right.
And why do we want that, right? We want people to be challenged. So I think that's where I hope people understand that the role of RAC is to raise resources, and usually the money flows to the people who need it the most, which are the ones in competitive races or the ones who might not have a real good chance to win, but they still want to fight the fight. And I wish more people would be supportive of that basic idea because it's what we do.
Well, it's interesting, as especially over these past year and a half, 2 years, the biggest eye opener for me is just, when you look behind the curtain and you see, my God, the workings of every candidate, and these things aren't cheap. I mean, even in the best of times, the $2 a gallon gas, that still wasn't cheap when you're traveling all over the state.
Right.
Trying to get volunteers, mailers, everything else. And I know, some people certainly are lobbying against, the so-called Madison lobbyists and the political machine. But one of the things that I often think about when I hear that is when you talk about this machine, yeah, you can rail against consultants. Sure, fine. They get paid to be, for that. But at the same time, when you talk about Republicans, conservatives, it's all of us. It's really at the end of the day.
Well, Ed, you're the machine.
Party.
The machine is the county party. I mean,
right.
I think the grand total of the number of paid staff at the RPW Madison is like 4 or 6 people.
Yes.
So it's apparatus with dozens of people running all over the state. They'll hire more in the campaign season, but it's good, decent people who are trying to keep the conservative movement going forward. It's not some kind of a nasty machine. It's a bunch of good people who are working their hardest. Don't always make the right decision. Sometimes we make mistakes. That's just part of being human. But everybody gets to be a critic when you're on the outside looking in. Just like I don't like every single call that is made at the Packer game, and we're all an armchair quarterback, but somebody's got to be on the field making the call. And if they make the right one, they're a hero. If they make the wrong one, they're coffee talk on Monday, right? I mean, so it's just the way it is for politics, no different.
Well, they got to fix it for the Packers, so that's going to just ruin everybody's day. You can always tell when the Packers lose, though, too. You go to work Monday morning, and it's like, oh, my God, what happened?
There's like a cloud hanging over, I know.
Oh, it gets real. It gets dark real fast on that one. I said last topic, but I got one more for you. One more.
Okay.
Obviously, you're running in a primary. You got an election coming up here. August 9th will be around the corner. Convention is next month. There's a lot to that. And every time I have candidates on here, as you'll see on the ticker below, I always put people's website on there. And I always tell people, if this is a gentleman that you want to support, then I want you guys to check that website out and, do your part to help out. Sure. I'm going to give you the last few minutes here because I would like for you to kind of, as I say, the elevator pitch. When I talk to people, it's like, hey, can I get you on the show? Here's my elevator pitch. Always like to give people, give candidates and representatives and senators the last word when it comes to that. So please, Mr. Robin Vos, I'm going to let you have the full screen on that. So go ahead.
Thank you, Ed. Well, thank you to everybody who listened. I always enjoy a good, thorough discussion and a civil conversation. So thank you again. Wisconsin is really at a crossroads. When I think about where we have been and where we need to go, the answers are pretty crystal clear. I think that when we saw what happened when conservatives won in 2011 and enacted the policies that they ran on, everything from concealed carry, expanded school choice, income tax cuts, Act 10, reforming the way government operates, that made me proud to be a conservative. I was really saddened when I saw that Governor Walker lost in 2018, and immediately I began to make sure that rules were in place and systems were in place that didn't allow Governor Evers to run roughshod over the legislature, which was the last hope for conservatives. I think if you look at the last 3 years under Governor Evers, most of the victories that he's going to claim are ones that we did, and he ultimately had nothing to do with, but putting his signature on the final document, taking a few seconds worth of work and taking credit for all the job that we did. I am proud of the work the legislature does. I'm frankly proud of the job that I've done as Speaker. I think we do a really good job holding the line on spending and taxes and advancing conservative ideas to get to the finish line. The 2022 election, every election is the most important of our lifetime, but for people in Wisconsin, this one's really going to make a difference. We need to make sure that Ron Johnson goes back to the U.S. Senate, and hopefully they get a majority. We need to reelect all of our members of Congress, and we need to focus most on picking up the third to add to the Republican majority, which will hopefully happen. Lastly, we need to make sure that we have a good, strong conservative majority in the legislature, and that's what I am working for every single day. Now, the people who live with me in Racine County know my record. I try to be as responsive as one human can be. I call people back, I listen, I go to events, I try to represent your interests. My primary opponent is brand new to Racine County. He just moved here literally a month ago to run for public office. He has a very doctrinaire set of beliefs, ones that really don't focus on listening, but mostly on telling. And I think that's the difference between the two of us. I hope that when people go to the polls in August, they vote again for me as I work really hard to advance conservative beliefs, hopefully with a Republican governor, and making sure that Wisconsin turns back to the days when we were all proud to be conservatives because we were leading the way for the entire country. Thanks a lot, Ed. I appreciate your time, and hopefully we can do this again.
No, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I really appreciate your time, and I tell everybody nobody owes me any time. I'm an over-opinionated jerk with an overpriced microphone, and I'm kind of proud of that. But I realize that you guys' time is valuable. Everybody that I've had on as a guest, it's been a great conversation, and I want to welcome you back anytime into the future if you're ever available, sir.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Ed. Take care. Don't forget to vote.
Thank you, sir. Yes, of course. All right. Thank you very much. That was Speaker Robin Vos. Guys, I want to thank you guys all here for joining tonight. And I understand, I didn't go into the chat room, and looking by the chat room comments, 174. I'm sure it's lit up in there, And you know what? I understand. People wanted to have a knockdown, drag out fight. But I told you guys, I'm having a conversation. I'm not interested in a fight that way. You want to have a fight, get your own show. That's really all I got to tell you on that. By having these conversations, civil conversations, opens dialogue, opens the possibility of getting more communication, understanding. And even if you don't agree, sometimes it's better just to understand where an individual comes from versus going for the jugular, especially if they're supposed to be on your side. Now you can make the argument one way or the other that you don't think they're on somebody's side, but you know what? Make that argument and then win your voters over. Because at the end of the day, we're either here to win and get Evers out of the office, or we're going to be, what's the word that I'm looking for? Complicit in giving Evers another 4 years. And I know which one I want to do. I'm looking for the win. I don't know about you guys, but I can't handle another 4 more years of Evers. Again, special thank you to Speaker Robin Vos. Really appreciate your time. Guys, tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, we're going to have Senator Pat Testin on, so we'll be carrying on the conversation with that. I want to thank you guys for, again, joining in here tonight. Good night. God bless you. God bless the state of Wisconsin. And I'm out. Good night.